Yak Gadget, made in America, based outside of Nashville, Tennessee. Yak Gadget offers all kinds of storage accessories, quick mount motor mounts, anchor systems, track mounted accessories, even paddles. Go to yakgadget.com and get your kayak decked out for your next trip out on the water.
The 153 Bait Company, based in Troy, Ohio, make everything from plastics to custom painted hard baits. Hook 'em hard and hook 'em often. All of our baits are made to order, and all of our hard baits are hand painted to order. So go to the153anglers.com to place your order today.
This segment is brought to you by Jig Masters. Step up your game with high-quality performance jigs, spinner baits, buzz baits, and more from jigmasters.com. And always, when in doubt, get the jig out.
You're listening to Bass Fishing for Noobs on the Paddle and Fin podcast with your hosts Ryan Milford and Sean Lavery.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thanks for listening to Bass Fishing for Noobs here on the Paddle and Fin podcast. I am your host for this evening, Sean Lavery. My buddy Ryan is busy with family obligations this evening, so I'm going to be flying solo until we bring our guest in, of course. And without any further ado, I will gladly bring in Mr. Guillermo Gonzales, who is kind enough to join us on the Noobs show this evening. Welcome, Guillermo.
How's it going, man?
Not bad, not bad. So for those of you watching on YouTube, you may notice it's a little dark where Guillermo is. He's actually traveling on the way back from the San Rayburn tournament. He was nice enough to call in while he's on the road, so we appreciate that. He's kind of really filling a last-minute need for us. Brian and I had a crazy weekend, just struggled to find time to record, but Guillermo was nice enough to hook us up this evening. So again, Guillermo's been on Paddle and Fin before, but I think this is the first time he's been on the Noobs show. So welcome, Guillermo.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. I'm glad that we were able to work out a time.
Yeah,
sorry,
me
I'm
too.
On the road.
No, that definitely happens, especially with the amount of tournaments that you seem to fish. I think you do a bunch of traveling, right? So it's probably old hat for you, I imagine.
It is at this point.
And it's probably not the most fun part of tournaments, but it's a necessary part, I'm sure.
Yeah, I enjoy it. I don't mind driving. I don't know what it is about just going places and just looking at everything and looking at the world change as you're driving by. There's something about it that I actually get a lot of peace from it for some reason. Maybe that's weird, but I do enjoy it.
That's cool. I mean, it's good. What's the farthest you've ever driven for a tournament?
Up until right now, I actually did. So to a lot of tournament anglers, this isn't much, but I did the trip to La Crosse. No, Lake St. Clair from Fort Worth. That was 17 and a half hours.
Wow. That's crazy. I think my longest one was from Pennsylvania to Tennessee when I went down to Dale Hollow. And that was it was supposed to be 13 hours, but on the way home I hit traffic and storms and all sorts of other stuff and ended up being like 15 hours. So I think that's the longest I've driven. But
oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, that's a long drive. For me, I can do like the 8-9 hour ones really well. Once we start getting into the 12s and the 13s, they start getting a little harder for me.
Yeah. And part of that drive is, do you go through like those states where they just seem to go on forever? Like I heard Kansas is no fun because it's all flat and it all looks exactly the same.
Kansas is okay. I don't mind it too much. I like driving through the Flint Hills. I think the Flint Hills are beautiful. The state that, for me, there's two states that never seem to end. And that's Arkansas and Iowa. I don't know why, but those two states, every time I drive, they never end.
Nice. Sounds like Iowa's probably a lot of cornfields, right? Tennessee, I was surprised that it really did take me a long time to go through Tennessee.
Yeah, Tennessee's a long state. And the one time I drove from South Florida to Georgia. That was pretty long too.
And that doesn't seem like it would be long, but yeah, you're right. I guess if you're in the very bottom part of Florida and you're going to Georgia, that probably does take some time.
It does. But I've done some long ones, but like I said, I don't mind it. It's always cool seeing new places.
Right. Well, for those of our listeners who haven't heard of you or aren't familiar with you, why don't you tell the folks who you are, where you're from, how long you've been fishing, what got you into kayak fishing, that part of your story.
Well, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Guillermo. I was actually born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and at a young age, around 8 years old, we moved to South Florida, and I actually went fishing for the first time at a first grade birthday party.
That's a cool birthday party.
Yeah, it was so cool. And we, so they brought us down to at that point we were in South Florida, and what they did was they said, hey, he took, my friend took 5 of his friends, and they got just a little apartment in the Keys, and we fished off this pier for 2 days. And I remember seeing the fish and just thinking, man, I just gotta catch one. And all the kids had given up, and they went over to the pool, and I was that kid that one of the chaperones had to stay with at the pier because I just had to catch one.
Right.
And I wound up being the only person on that trip to catch a fish. It was this little tiny fish. I don't even know what kind of fish it was. I got a picture of it somewhere. And I had the biggest smile on my face you could possibly imagine.
That's awesome. I'm gonna have to start planning those kind of birthday parties, man.
Those, you know what? Those are the ones that make the world a better place. More kids need to be out fishing.
Amen to that. Holy cow! So that's how you got started into fishing. Then did you do any big boat stuff or other stuff before you jumped into a kayak, or what brought you there?
Well, in Florida, so I got into fishing pretty deep. I really enjoyed it a lot. And in Florida, we did a lot of backcountry fishing. So fishing like the flats and the mangroves, and we fished for snook, redfish, and tarpon. And I was obsessed with that growing up. I mean, absolutely obsessed. And from then, that's actually where I kind of started kayak fishing. One of my mom's friends had a kayak at her apartment, which was at this big lagoon with a bunch of snook in it. And I used to always beg her friend. It was a little tandem yellow ocean kayak.
Okay.
And I used to always, beg my mom to ask her friend if I could take the kayak out, if I could go over there and take the kayak out. And I used to go and I used to catch those snook. And from then on, I knew I liked fishing in a kayak, but I didn't really get serious into kayak fishing until I was in college. When I was in school, I didn't really have a way to get on the water, and a kayak just seemed like an affordable way to do it. And it wasn't long before I decided, hey, they got kayak tournaments. I'm going to fish one. And I entered one on Joe Pool, and I actually won my very first ever kayak tournament. And I was hooked.
That's awesome. That's the way to do it, I guess. If you're going to get started, you might as well win it, while you're at it.
Exactly. I agree.
So interesting. And you've continued that success as you've gone on from, just looking at your highlights of your career. I mean, you've definitely kind of done well, and your name is pretty well known throughout the kayaking community. Like, what you want to go over some of the highlights of your record, I guess?
Sure. So probably one of my more memorable seasons was, oh shoot, I don't even remember what year it was, but I want to say it was like 2016 or 15 or 17. It might have been 17. All the years blend into one now for some reason. But where I won the Cats Angler of the Year and the North Texas Trail Angler of the Year, and I kind of did like the little Texas sweep all in one year, and that was really cool. I'll never forget that year, and I can talk about all kinds of awesome tournaments that I've had, but that was really a memorable year for me, just getting to have that good of a season that I was able to do that.
Awesome. Yeah, that definitely, if you can put a bunch of wins together, a lot of times if you're fishing a ton of stuff, it does kind of, build on top of each other, so if you can take advantage of a hot streak like that and really, rack up some wins and some titles, that definitely helps when you're going for the bigger titles like the Angler of the Year and stuff like that. But cool, man. So again, you mentioned you were just coming home from Sam Rayburn. And you mentioned you did pretty well there too. You want to let the folks know how you did?
Yeah, so I finished fourth. I had an amazing time. For those that followed, you noticed everybody kept talking about the fact that Sam Rayburn was super high. It's 10.5 feet over normal pool, so the lake just went way into the woods, which made it kind of cool. So there was a lot of boat ramps closed, so a lot of the big boat tournaments this weekend were canceled as a result. And they didn't cancel our kayak tournament, which meant we got to enjoy Lake Sam Rayburn without 2,500 boats on it.
Yeah, and that's a rare experience, I'm sure.
For sure. And, the fishing was spectacular as far as numbers are concerned. I think 70 people turned in 5 bass limit.
Wow. And were they up in the trees or were they out and about?
Oh my gosh, they were a little bit of everywhere, honestly. I mean, some guys caught them out. I kind of caught them on the edge, on the line between the old bank and the trees. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that.
I was fishing what I like to call drains. For those of you that may not know what a drain is, or may have heard that term before but don't know what it is, it's basically like, I like to think of it as like a backwards point, right? So if you have this big flat, so to speak, imagine this big flat on a lake. Let's say it's 8 feet deep, right? And around this flat, you might have 20 feet of water. If there's a spot where the water, if you were to drain the lake where the water drains the 20-foot section, that's considered a drain.
Okay.
And that's what I was targeting. I was targeting those drains. There was these big flats that had all kinds of flooded forest where they would drain into the old lake bed. And it seemed like, to me, the fish were, on their way out. They started dropping the lake a couple of days ago, dropping it again. And at least for me, it felt like fish were on their way out to deeper water, in addition to the fact that it's June and the fish would have been going in that direction anyways. And so I decided to target those drains, and I flipped a lot of trees and bushes on those drains, and that's how I caught the majority of my fish. And I had a great time. I caught probably 40 to 50 fish a day in the trees.
Wow.
Flipping, doing that, and I had an absolute blast.
Okay, that does sound like a pretty good time. I imagine when the water level is dropping, they probably want to get out of there before it gets so low that they're trapped, right? So it makes sense that they would work their way back out.
Right. And in addition to that, one of the things that I was noticing, and in the last few years, or in the last 5 years, we've had a lot of high water in Texas, and I've learned a few things about high water. And when the the water initially first moves up above pool, it seems like the fish immediately move up with it. I mean, immediately. Right. I mean, it could go up 10 feet in one night, and the fish are already way up there.
Okay.
You know? But over time, you know, once that water, you know, floods all those trees and bushes, it starts to kill, you know, it starts to choke out those trees and bushes. And when those trees and bushes start to die, I think, I don't know, I'm not going to claim to understand, like, what bass kind of do or what they think in that scenario, but I don't think they like it because they start to move out. So, like, that first week of flooded water is spectacular. But then, after a while, once that stuff starts to die, the bite seems to kind of peter off. And you have to, when the bite starts to peter off, you have to target the stuff that stays alive, in which a lot of cases, you know, the willows, since they're kind of a wetland tree, the willows will stay alive and they'll stay nice and green, and the fish will seem to suck up to those. But aside from that, all the other trees start to die, and I think the fish kind of start making their way out. And one of the things that I noticed was when I looked underwater, a lot of those bushes were all starting to die, and I think that was kind of my signal that I need to start moving out and try to imagine where the fish might be going. And that's when I started targeting those drains.
Okay. I was just going to ask, in that case, you start from there and then work your way backwards until you find the point at which they've moved to, or you just look for the drains and stuff for the paths that they would be moving on?
Right. I just tried, in this particular case, I just tried to intercept them, you know, where they would go. And I know specifically on Sam Rayburn, those fish really like to, they really like to use those drains to get in and out of shallow water. And knowing that kind of, I guess you could say it almost gave me an upper hand, because I kind of had a pretty good idea that's where they were going to be, and that's exactly where they were. So I didn't really follow them out necessarily. It was one of those things where during the week in practice, the bite way up in the trees and the bushes was really good, but it seemed to be getting worse and worse as the week went on. And that's when I decided I had to make a change, and that's when I started targeting those drains.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, when the big boats are allowed in, is that a place that they can usually get with back up in the trees, or are they kind of, that's like one of the few spots that, you know, kayakers can get that the big boats can't?
You know, honestly, it'd be real hard to fish some of the places I was fishing with a big boat. I mean, not without tearing up your boat, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's nice too.
It was really cool. I actually, I had the good fortune of, I had my GoPro running for both days of the tournament, and I think I have some really cool footage catching fish way up in the trees. So I'm looking forward to hopefully posting some of that footage here in the next month or so.
Awesome. Yeah, I look forward to seeing that. That's cool. I've seen a lot of pictures of the submerged trees and stuff. Never had the opportunity to fish much like that. I've had a few opportunities to fish some flooded trees before, but probably never to the extent that it is down there. So, especially 10-foot high, because I'm sure water's places all sorts of places that it never is at that point. So.
Oh, I was just flipping a beaver style bait.
Okay.
On a 5/8 ounce weight.
I was just going to ask that. So it's not like as big as like one of those big punching weights, but that is still pretty heavy. So.
Yeah, it had to be heavy enough to get through branches of trees and bushes, but it seemed like I experimented a little bit with 3/4 and 1 ounce, but I you know, usually that's what I would use in that scenario, but it seemed like they were eating it better a little lighter, so I just stuck with the lighter one.
Okay, nice. That's one technique that I definitely don't get to do as often as I'd like, just because we don't have the places that I fish a lot of times don't necessitate it. You know, most of the stuff is, you know, wide open and the few places that I can do it, I have other things that I've, kind of grown accustomed to using. So definitely something I'd like to improve upon, though, because and I'm sure I'd be pretty bad at it at first because never having done it too much. But I know when we were talking before the show, you kind of mentioned that I was looking for what kind of topic we wanted to talk about. If there's anything you thought you really had dialed in, and you kind of mentioned that you consider yourself kind of a master of a bunch of things, maybe not out and out expert on any one in particular thing, but that you're really good at a bunch of different things. And, I think that's a great asset to have, especially when you're traveling around doing tournaments and never sure kind of, what you might need to throw. So what kind of got you into that? Was it just that you'd try something until you felt like you had it really dialed in and then move on, or, how'd that come about?
Well, I can tell you how it all started. When I was in college, I fished on the TCU college team. And my very first tournament ever, we got it handed to us. I mean, absolutely handed to us. And at that, I was so embarrassed at how badly we got it handed to us that I decided, okay, I'm just going to learn everything. I don't care what it's going to take. I'm going to learn it all. And so that's what I did. I started, at the time, I actually didn't even have my kayak. So, I started learning everything that I could, just fishing from the bank, And so I started experimenting with everything that I could. Now, what I will say, one of the things that really helped me improve was constantly fishing different bodies of water. Once I got my kayak, I made it a point to not just live at one lake. I made it a point to fish bodies of water that challenged me, that intimidated me.
Okay.
And it's those bodies of water that make you have to learn new things and make you do things that you might not be particularly comfortable with.
Okay.
So I made it a point to do that. And one of the ways that I know helped me make it a point to do that was tournament fishing, through just my local club.
Right.
You don't get to choose where the tournament's at. They choose where it's at, and by forcing yourself to compete, you're forcing yourself to continue to learn, because you're always going to be faced with a new scenario. And the more new scenarios that you face yourself with, the better you're going to get at making adjustments and learning new things. And that's kind of been, I think, my biggest asset. At this point, I don't even want to know how many tournaments I've fished in my life at this point, but it's got to be hundreds. And that's really been one of the things that's helped me get better.
Okay. So when you're going to these tournaments, like, would you only, I guess you bring a bunch of stuff. What makes you decide what to throw, or, hey, I'm going to, I've read that this works here, or I might not have never done it, but I'm going to try it and see if I can, put some fish together?
Yeah, a little research can go a long way. And there's also times where a little research can kind of lead you in the wrong direction,
Right.
One term in tournament fishing that seems to go around is it's hard to catch somebody else's fish. A lot of times you do your research and somebody tells you about how they catch them, but that might not necessarily be how you are going to catch them or how you would be best suited to try to catch them. But usually when I'm going into an event, just like anybody, I start map study, and I start kind of putting pieces to the puzzle together with regards to what kind of lake is this? Is this a really clear lake? Is this a really deep lake? Is it muddy? What kind of cover does it have? And little by little, I'll take those things and I'll start to try to think about different techniques that I feel very comfortable with in those scenarios. So, for example, let's say that I'm going to a pretty clear lake with with some bank structure or maybe a little bit of like a lot of wood. In those kind of scenarios, I love to top water fish. So you can just about bet I'm going to pack my top waters. I'm going to pack stuff maybe with a little bit lighter line, and I'll have to consider, what kind of baits I can throw to get those kind of finicky, clear water fish to eat, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you kind of, as you're breaking down the lake, you take a look at all basically the environment, and once you've fished as many tournaments as you have, you probably do have a kind of a good idea of what you've had success with on certain bodies of water or certain types of bodies of water. And do you journal or do you do anything like that, or do you just kind of remember it?
I really should, because there's been times where I'll fish a tournament one year and I'll have a tournament on the same lake like 5 years later, right? And it will be around the same time, but I may not remember exactly what month it was or exactly what the water temperature was or exactly even maybe sometimes what the weather was. And there are times that I wish I had a journal so I could look back on that and compare notes. But no, I actually don't journal, but I probably need to start, to be honest.
We've talked to different guests, and they all seem to have different opinions on that, But I guess once you've fished as many tournaments as you have, it probably does. Like I can kind of remember. I haven't fished tournaments for that long, so I can obviously remember most of the ones that I fished pretty well. But when you've done it as many times and for as long as you have, I'm sure, like you said, it pretty much all blends together at some point and gets a little tough to remember the specifics.
Yeah, I can usually remember more or less how I did and more or less how I caught them, but it's just those specifics of what was the water temperature, and what was the weather, maybe what was the pressure doing, or was it pre-front, post-front, things like that. Those specifics that you may not quite remember.
Right. So, and then if you have had success on a body of water at it seems like it's lining up. Obviously, you probably kind of go in with this almost similar game plan. At what point do you switch it up? Like you talked about how at practice at Sam Rayburn they were up in the trees, and then you kind of noticed that that bite started dying off, and you had to kind of switch up gears a little bit. Maybe not what you were throwing, but where you were throwing. What kind of starts off that process when I guess you just have a feel for, hey, this isn't working out. Like for me, I struggle with that a lot because I don't know if it's just something I'm doing wrong that I'm not catching them, or the fish really have transitioned to something else or to a different place.
Yeah, that's a question that I've been asked many times. And it's really a tough question to answer because there's so many variables that go into that decision making. And one of the biggest variables that goes into that is how stubborn I'm feeling. There's days where I'm stubborn, and even though I know something's not working, I try to make it work anyways.
Right.
But
yep.
But I can tell you in this particular scenario, I just noticed, that the number of bites that I was getting had severely decreased. And I knew I hadn't beat up the water too bad, and I should have been getting more bites. So I came to that conclusion that something changed. There's a transition going on, and I wasn't sure what it was at that point, but I had a feeling that maybe fish were moving out. And I didn't fish those drains much in practice at all. So they could have been loaded up there in practice as well, and I'd have never known it. But once that shallow bite kind of started to peter out, I kind of knew I had to do something. And one of the things that I feel like one of the things that makes a great tournament angler, now I'm not calling myself a great tournament angler, but I feel like if you want to consider yourself, or if you want to be a good tournament angler, you have to know when to make the decision to make a drastic change in your day or in what you're doing, you know? That it's a really hard thing to do, especially when you've been on a pattern all week and you've caught Lord knows how many fish or gotten shooken off however many fish. It's hard, and I get stubborn myself sometimes, and I get hung up in a pattern that's not working, and I ride it to the end of the day, and I don't do well in the tournament. Now, there's times when, you know, I've been just, and we've all been there as tournament anglers, where we're all just kind of scratching our head. There's times where, you know, we're doing something, we know it's worked throughout the week, but we can't, you know, we can't quite comprehend if we're going to make a move, what we're going to do and why it would work, you know. And I've certainly had those moments, and for that reason, in those moments, sometimes I've stuck what I was doing, and sometimes it's worked out, and I've caught a couple more, maybe not how I caught them in practice, but enough to at least get me through the end of the tournament. And sometimes, you know, you'll go the rest of the day and not get a single bite, but I guess that's fishing.
Right.
It's
right.
Making that decision to move is really can be a tough one. And to say that I know a magic formula to know when to move would be a complete lie, because I definitely do not have that. Excuse me, that formula pinned down. It's just one of those things where if I can make sense, if I can make sense of it in my head, I can usually do it, especially when I'm not feeling stubborn.
Yeah. Well, if you did know that formula, I think you would have a pretty successful business in letting people know that, because I'm sure, like you said, that's kind of what separates, you know, the good anglers from the great anglers, is the ones who can kind of take a look at the situation and just kind of transition when it's necessary, instead of just either, you know, when the bite completely dies off and you really don't have a choice. But you know, if it's you know, you hear you should never leave fish to catch fish, but if you're looking to upgrade your size, or, you know, that kind of thing, and you know, sometimes you do need to switch gears a little bit and try something else. And just in my brief time, you know, I've seen it, like you said, both work and also not work. I've definitely had the times where I switched up and still didn't catch anything. But then I've definitely had times, and it makes you kick yourself when you spent the last 2 hours doing something that you think should be working, and then you switch things up and start slaying them. You're like, why didn't I, you know, switch earlier? You know, why was I, you know, wasting my time for 2 hours when I could have been catching them the whole time?
Right. And, you know, one point that I'll make is a lot of times, you know, a lot of anglers will face a situation where something that worked in practice or that was working in the morning suddenly doesn't seem to work as well. And a lot of anglers may go and decide, okay, I'm going to make a drastic move. I'm going to move somewhere else on the lake, or I'm going to, you know, I've been fishing slow on the bottom. I'm going to start throwing top water, whatever it may be. But every now and then, all it takes is a really subtle change. And what I mean by that is, for example, you could be, you know, slipping with a half-ounce weight, and just for whatever reason that day, they want it to fall either a little faster or a little slower. and that could be the difference between getting more bites or not. One really crazy example that I can name was one of my good friends, Brian Howell, recently won a tournament on Lake Seminole. And he said that, I think this may not have been on Seminole. I don't remember what lake this was, but he was catching them really good in the morning on a jackhammer, right?
Yeah.
And for some reason, halfway through the day, he hit some of his really good spots and he wasn't catching them as good. And, the man loves to throw a chatterbait. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to change it. I'm going to change it up, but I'm not going to change it up that much. And he switched to a thunder cricket. So he's still throwing a chatterbait. It just vibrates just a little differently, and he started wearing them out.
It's funny
it's crazy
you say
how
that. Yeah. Because I had a very similar experience
something
where
so subtle can sometimes be the difference.
Right. I was fishing a tournament, and I was struggling to put together bites, and I was asking people as I bumped into them, how they were doing, and the one guy was like, oh yeah, I'm doing all right on the jackhammer. I didn't have any jackhammers with me. All I had was a Project Z. And so I started throwing it and started slaying them. And at the end, I ended up finished second in that tournament. And the one of the guys asked me, he's like, well, I caught a few on the jackhammer, but you caught way more than me. And I think it was just that subtle difference between the jackhammer and the Project Z that I think they were seeing the jackhammer a ton, because I think a lot of people were throwing it. And I don't know how much different a Project Z is from a jackhammer, but that day I felt like it made a difference because I was kind of following up behind these people, and I was catching fish that maybe they weren't. So.
No, it's 100% true. I mean, I feel like I can say that that's one of those things that's very true. And for example, too, in the spinnerbait game, sometimes, changing your blade, changing the color of your blade can make all the difference. And it seems like it wouldn't in your head. Why would it make that big a difference? But I think at the end of the day, we don't understand bass. And so we have to be willing to try crazy things. And sometimes it just works out.
And I use it as an excuse just to fill my tackle box too, because, you never know when you might need that one spinner blade that has the orange blade on it.
Exactly.
Much to my wife's chagrin, I think.
Exactly.
But no, it's weird how, even like you said, just a subtle color change can make a big difference. And that's when it's tough too. If you are catching some fish, maybe not a lot of fish, is knowing whether you need a big change or just a little change. So I guess maybe start tweaking it a little bit and then go from there. So see if that makes a difference.
Right. And that if I had to leave our listeners with anything, it's, start small and work your way bigger. Start with small changes. And if the small changes don't amount to anything, make a little bit bigger change. And if that doesn't amount to anything, you can make a more drastic change and see what happens. I think, a lot of times fishermen have an instinct and they know, this is what ought to work. And what I find is most of the time, everybody's pretty close, they wrote the book on bass fishing, and that book it's a good book. You can learn a lot from it. You can take a lot from it, but a lot of times, you have to make small tweaks from what the bass should be doing, and sometimes that's all it takes. And I think a lot of fishermen are usually on the right track, and a lot of times it just takes a small adjustment.
Right. And those kind of things are when you see something that you don't think should work, and it kind of goes against the book, but for one person it might be the exact ticket they need for their style fishing, and something maybe that wouldn't work for 90% of the people will work for them, even though, like you said, it goes against that book. And it's just what happens to be, everybody's different. So finding not only what the vast majority say works for them, but what works for you specifically, and
Yep.
something you have confidence in. That, like, how do you develop confidence in a bait? That's another thing that I struggle with when I try new things. Is I will pick it up and be like, oh, I'm going to do this, and I've never done it. Where they say, oh, just bring that bait and only that bait for that day. I've never had the, because I always want to catch fish, and if I'm not catching fish, then I really get frustrated, and that's what makes me not just bring that bait. But
Right. Well, I think one of the things that you could do to kind of help you with that is, a lot of people say, yeah, just bring that bait. But one of the things you could do, instead of going fishing and just bringing that bait, you could say, hey, I'm going to make, 5 or 6 casts with this bait every time I go fishing, and eventually you're going to catch a fish on it. Eventually, it might not happen that next day. It might not happen that next week, but eventually you're going to catch a fish on it. And a lot of times, all it takes is that first fish for that confidence level to shoot way up. Another thing that I try to do when I'm trying to gain confidence in a bait is I do my research, and I try to find a place where it would really, really make sense to throw that bait. So, for example, if let's say I wanted to learn how to throw the frog, I might go somewhere with a lot of, heavy cover to throw the frog over because it makes sense. If I can get it to make sense in my head, I can keep that rod in my hands,
Right.
It's hard to go to like, it's difficult to go to like a muddy, rocky lake and just decide I'm going to throw a frog all day, when you're not sure that would even be the best thing to throw. You want to go somewhere where at the very least it makes sense in your head, and that'll help you keep that rod in your hand a little longer, and hopefully you'll start catching more fish on whatever technique you're trying to learn.
Right. And that, that's when the confidence comes, I guess. And so you might as well just put as many of the odds in your favor as you can, so that, you do find some level of success, or at least feel comfortable, like you said, keeping the rod in your hand and to keep throwing it. But I really do like that. The idea of just, take something and, say you're going to throw it at least, half a dozen times, before you give it up or try something else, and just wait until you, because it kind of makes me feel like the first time I got a tube bite, I never really had the feel for it, and this was back when I was really kind of first learning bottom baits, and I didn't have super sensitive rods, so I never really felt that tick 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 along the bottom. I felt it a little bit, but it wasn't until I kind of got a little bit better rod that I really understood what people were talking about feeling that bait, just what dragging something felt like, because I just didn't have the feel for it. And then when you get your first bite while you're dragging a bait, you really it really just connects things in your mind and lets oh, this is what they were talking about. All those times I heard that phrase, but to actually get to experience it and feel it, it, just takes that knowledge to a whole different level, I think.
Right. Exactly. And I know there's certain things that strategy has definitely kind of played for me. Just throwing it a couple of times, and like I said, eventually you will catch a fish on it, and that first fish, it's incredible what one fish on a bait you don't feel comfortable with will do for you.
Right.
Just one. It's all it takes.
Yep. Then I have to give it up in my mind too that might not always work, and I maybe shouldn't throw it every time I go to the lake in that same spot.
Right. No, that too.
Well, cool, man. Is there any other tips you would offer up to a new tournament angler? I mean, definitely, some of the things we talked about tonight, I think, were amazing, and will be very helpful to our listeners. Anything else, like you would say, sticks out in your mind as as a tip that maybe you got or advice that you got that really, made a difference, or something that just sticks with you and you always have in your mind at each tournament?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a couple things, and the first one is don't be afraid to, when you show up to a tournament, even if you have a bad day, don't be afraid to have a conversation. Kayak anglers are so open. It's one of the really cool things about our sport. They're so open. Don't be afraid to ask somebody who had success that day, hey man, can you walk me through, your thought process today? I'm just trying to learn. I'm trying to get a better idea. I didn't have as good of a day, and I'd like to know a little bit more about how you put it together. Don't be afraid to talk. I know I try to be as open as I can be, and then I don't know any of my friends that would that wouldn't be willing to be very open about how they caught them or what their thought process was. So definitely be willing to reach out. And my other piece of advice is don't give up. Keep fishing tournaments. You don't have to fish. These days there's so many options. There's so many club options, and that that you can get in at a low entry, and that is by far the best way to get better, is to continuously compete, because it will force you to figure out ways to catch fish. Going out, I know for me, if I just go out and fun fish, and I do that for a long time, I'll get kind of in a groove where all I'll want to do is one thing, because I'll go to a lake where this works really well, and that's all I'll do, and I'll start to lose feel for certain things. But staying out on the tournament trail keeps you sharp, and being willing to compete will definitely help harness some of those skills that you might be trying to harness. And that's my other biggest recommendation. Just don't be shy. Don't be afraid to compete.
Right.
One of the greatest things about kayak fishing, honestly, is that most of the people that fish in a lot of our tournaments are just there to have a good time with everybody else. You don't have to feel like you have to perform to fit in, because you don't. You absolutely don't.
Right. And that was definitely a lesson that I didn't even start fishing tournaments for the longest time, because I thought, oh, I'm not good enough to do that. But once I finally started, I was like, oh my gosh, why did I wait so long to try this? Because everybody was so nice and helpful, and it is a great source of knowledge, and it kind of translates into time on the water, even maybe not directly, but I mean, if you fish more tournaments, you're going to be out on the water more. So, we always say that's kind of like the number one learning tool, is to get out there and do it. And, if fishing tournaments is the way that gets you out on the water more, then, that's a good thing too. So.
Right. Exactly. And in tournaments, at least for me, in tournaments, you feel extra pressure to catch fish. And it's that extra pressure that you feel that not only kind of makes it exhilarating when everything works out, but it's that extra pressure that you feel that forces you to step outside of your comfort zone. And
right.
If you want to learn, you have to be willing to do that.
Right.
And just going out to the lake, not that there's anything wrong with just going out to the lake and enjoying yourself without pressure. There's nothing wrong at all with that. In fact, I wish I did a lot more of that. But being willing to put a little pressure onto it, really, like I said, it forces you to get outside of your comfort zone, and that outside of your comfort is where you learn.
Right.
Right. You don't learn near as fast in your comfort zone. I'll tell you that right now.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And, it might be intimidating and scary, but like you said, once you start learning that you can figure things out, you can put pieces together, you start learning how to, decode that puzzle, your confidence is going to go up across the board, not just with one technique but your confidence overall as an angler, and saying, you know what, I am learning to read my, my fishing sense, and like the more time you spend doing that, the sharper you'll get, and the better angler you'll be. It makes sense for sure.
Without a doubt.
Cool, man. Well, we are coming up on an hour, so I definitely appreciate you coming on. You kind of saved my butt, get me a guest for this week, so I appreciate it so much. I wanted to give you a chance to shout out any sponsors and let the folks know where they can follow you on social media.
Yeah, for sure. I would encourage everybody to follow me on Instagram. My handle is Guillermo Gonzales Outdoors. I do most of my social media there. I've been slacking a little bit lately, but I'm hoping to get it kicked off again here soon. And yeah, I am blessed, and I have some great sponsors. I fish out of a Diablo paddlesports kayak. If you've never seen one, they're unbelievably stable. It's insane. It's insane how stable. I'm the clumsiest guy in the world, and I've only ever fallen off at once. So that says something.
Okay.
Of course, Werner paddles, Excite baits, also Yak Attack. Yak Attack has an accessory for things I didn't even know I needed accessories for. So get on the website, check it out. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it, and I hope we can do this again sometime soon.
Yeah, man. Hey, you mentioned videos. Did you post most of those on your Instagram, or where else do you put those?
Well, up until recently, so I haven't started a YouTube channel yet.
Okay.
I used to put my videos on my Facebook, and I do have a lot of videos on my Facebook, and it's public. So if whoever wants to watch my videos on my Facebook, you're more than welcome. I don't really have too much instructional content on there, but I'm hoping to, start doing more instructional content on YouTube as soon as I get my YouTube channel kicked off.
Cool. Well, we definitely look forward to that. So, well, man, again, thank you so much. It was awesome having you on. We'll definitely have you on again. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about dialing in those specific different techniques and stuff, because I'm all ears about that. The more techniques I feel like I can learn and be comfortable with, the better, it's going to make me as an angler. So, and it definitely helps hearing somebody, kind of lay it out for you, how to get out of your comfort zone and not throw the wacky rig a million times like I'm accustomed to doing. So,
hey, there ain't nothing wrong with a wacky rig.
Cool, man. Well, drive safe. Thanks again. And everybody be sure and hop on and check him out on Instagram. And we look forward to seeing some YouTube content too in the future. So thanks, Guillermo. I appreciate you coming on so much. And guys, this has been the Bass Fishing for Noobs segment on the Paddle and Fin podcast, where we bring you the techniques, the tricks, and tips to help you rip more lips. And I got to find our outro. Where is that? My Ryan usually does the outro part, so I am shooting from the hip with this part. Let's see. Oh, it's not here. Okay. Well, I think we can add that in later. So I will just say good night, Guillermo. Drive safe, like I said, and thank you so much. And we'll catch you all later.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate you.
Yep.